Behind closed doors, a journey into the depths of forbidden love. Picture this, my friends, a dimly lit street in Las Vegas, far from the neon lights and endless glitz you might expect. This is not the Vegas of bright dreams, but a darker corner where the air is thick with secrets and every shadow conceals a truth waiting to be unveiled. What I'm about to share with you isn't some imagined tale, it's a true story. One that will crawl under your skin, linger in your thoughts, and leave you questioning the very nature of love and redemption. It all begins with Peter, an ordinary man living an ordinary life, until a single moment changed everything. A chance encounter, you could say. But trust me, this is no simple romance. No, this is a love story twisted by fate, burdened by secrets, and shadowed by the realities of a life lived on the edge. This is the story of a man drawn into the depths of the human heart, where love and despair dance a dangerous, seductive dance. As I tell you Peter's story, you'll find yourself on a roller coaster of emotions, questioning the lengths we'll go to for love, the sacrifices we make, and the dark places we venture into to find redemption. There are twists that will leave you gasping, moments of passion and pain that will make your heart race, and revelations that will shake you to your core. So lean in close, because once you start listening, there's no turning back. What you'll discover in these shadows may change the way you see love forever. Are you ready to step into this true tale of love, betrayal, and the price we pay for desire? Then let's begin. The Solitary Scholar. Once upon a time, in a dimly lit neighborhood nestled along one of the most notorious streets of Las Vegas, there lived Peter, a university professor shrouded in solitude. His apartment, inherited from his father, overlooked the gritty world below, a place where secrets festered and shadows danced beneath the flickering streetlights. The neighborhood was a far cry from the vibrant nightlife that Las Vegas was known for. It was quiet at night, illuminated only by the occasional glow of street lamps that struggled against the darkness. Peter was a man of sharp intellect, known for dissecting the intricacies of literature and love in his lectures. Yet, in his own life, he felt like a ghost, haunted by the specters of his insecurities. Each night, as the moon cast long shadows over the empty streets, Peter retreated to his balcony, a refuge that offered a limited view of a world he felt utterly disconnected from. The street below was alive with whispers and secrets, a stark contrast to the chill of loneliness that enveloped him. Occasionally, he would hear the muffled sounds of laughter and soft conversations, punctuated by the echo of high heels clicking on the pavement as figures drifted in and out of the shadows. He would catch glimpses of couples, their silhouettes entwined in the glow of the streetlights, sharing moments of intimacy that felt worlds away from his own existence. Yet, Peter remained an outsider, a solitary observer of joy in a neighborhood that thrived on fleeting connections. From his vantage point, he could see the flickering glow of neon signs, casting colorful reflections on the damp pavement below. They illuminated faces that often seemed caught in a web of desire and desperation, but they also reminded him of the warmth he craved. He often imagined what it would be like to be part of that world, to share in the warmth of companionship, to experience the intimate glances and soft touches that signified love and belonging. The emptiness in his heart grew heavier with each passing day, a stone lodged in his chest, and he longed for a connection that seemed forever out of reach. Peter's life revolved around books and lectures, the musty scent of aged paper his only companion. He found solace in the pages of romantic novels, losing himself in the passionate tales of characters who loved with abandon. Yet, as he turned each page, a bitter longing gnawed at him, a yearning for a love that transcended the written word. In the classroom, he was an engaging storyteller, captivating his students with tales of heartbreak and redemption, yet he struggled to apply those lessons to his own life. His colleagues often invited him to social gatherings, but he politely declined, preferring the quiet company of his books. The thought of mingling, of small talk and forced laughter filled him with dread. He wore his solitude like a cloak, shielding him from the vulnerability of forming connections, but it also isolated him further, leaving him adrift in a sea of loneliness. As he watched the moon rise higher in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the deserted streets, Peter reflected on his life. He wondered if he would always be a spectator, trapped in a cycle of observation and yearning. With every passing night, the ache in his heart deepened, a reminder of the life he desired but could never grasp. What would it take to break free from the confines of his solitude? Would he ever have the courage to reach out and touch the warmth of another's soul? Little did he know that fate had other plans in store for him, plans that would shatter his carefully constructed walls and thrust him into a world of passion and chaos, a world where love would demand everything from him, but also offer the possibility of redemption. The winds of change were stirring, whispering promises of adventure and connection that awaited just beyond the shadows of his balcony. But for now, he remained a solitary scholar, a prisoner of his own heart, gazing longingly at a life he could only dream of as the distant echoes of laughter floated up to him like a haunting melody. A glimpse of chaos. Everything changed one fateful evening when Peter caught sight of her, a vision of chaos and allure under the flickering street lamp. Nina was a street girl, her beauty striking yet haunting, captivating anyone who crossed her path. She wore a tight, sparkling red dress that hugged her curves, accentuating her long legs and leaving little to the imagination. The dress shimmered under the dim glow of the streetlight, drawing the gaze of passers-by, while her raven black hair cascaded down her shoulders in wild waves. Her lips, painted a deep crimson, curled into a mischievous smile that spoke of untold stories and hidden desires. As she leaned against the lamppost, her movements were fluid and sensual, each sway of her hips a deliberate invitation. With every flick of her wrist, she adjusted her hair, sending a cascade of enticing laughter that echoed through the night air like a siren's call. Her laughter was intoxicating and dangerous, stirring something deep within Peter that he had long buried beneath layers of intellect and solitude. It was a sound that filled the empty corners of his heart with a bittersweet ache, one that pulled him closer to the edge of his own despair. Nina stood on the sidewalk with a group of her friends, each clad in equally revealing attire, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the street. The air was thick with the scent of cheap perfume and cigarette smoke, and the conversations they shared were punctuated with words that dripped with a seductive playfulness. They exchanged flirtatious jabs and crude jokes, their voices a mix of teasing and camaraderie, but beneath the surface lay an undercurrent of desperation, a shared understanding of the darkness that consumed their lives. "Look at that one," Nina exclaimed, her finger pointing at a man walking by, his gaze lingering on her. "He looks like he's just begging for a good time." Her friends erupted into fits of laughter, the kind that masked their pain, each punchline more vulgar than the last. "You know what they say, $1 for a smile, and 100 for the night," one of them chimed in, her voice dripping with bravado. From his perch on the balcony, Peter felt the sting of their words as they drifted up to him, sharp and raw. He watched as Nina embraced her role, flirting shamelessly with passing men, her laughter echoing like a melody that lingered in the back of his mind. The customers who wandered into the scene were often strangers looking for fleeting pleasure, their intentions clear as they approached with hunger in their eyes. They were seeking the thrill of desire, a momentary escape from their mundane lives, completely unaware of the complex tapestry of pain and survival that lay beneath Nina's glittering exterior. Days turned into weeks, and Peter found himself obsessed with her. He spent long hours in his cramped apartment, poring over novels that spoke of heroism and rescue, imagining himself as the knight who would save her from the chaos that enveloped her. In his mind, Nina transformed into a fragile flower trapped in a concrete jungle, longing for freedom from a world that demanded everything and offered little in return. But each night, he watched in torment as she smiled and flirted with men who knew nothing of her pain, her laughter a mask hiding the darkness within. He felt powerless, longing to reach out and pull her from the abyss, but each moment spent in her presence only deepened his own despair. The contrast of her vibrant spirit against the shadows of her reality gnawed at him, a constant reminder of the life he wished he could offer, a life filled with warmth, love, and safety. As he stood at his balcony, the moonlight spilling over the street like a soft blanket, Peter wrestled with his emotions. Would he have the courage to step into her world, to break down the barriers that separated them? Or would he remain a prisoner of his own heart, forever gazing at the life he could only dream of? The chaos of Nina's world beckoned him, an alluring siren's call that promised adventure but also threatened to consume him whole. Stepping into the abyss. The night everything changed, Peter finally stepped off the balcony, compelled by a force stronger than his fears. As he descended the worn stairs of his dilapidated building, each creak echoed his internal turmoil, a reminder of the weight he carried. His heart raced like a caged bird desperate for freedom, driven by a primal urge to reach Nina before it was too late. When he arrived at the street, the scene unfolded before him like a chaotic tapestry woven with threads of desire and despair. The air was thick with the heady scent of sweat and cheap perfume, mingling with the distant sounds of laughter and music. Nina stood at the curb, her laughter piercing the night, a sound that once felt like a melody now twisted into something sinister. She was a dark goddess amidst a world of shadows, clad in that provocative red dress, her body moving with a sensuality that was both intoxicating and terrifying. But tonight, her energy was electric, drawing the attention of all the men who roamed the street. As she tossed her head back in laughter, revealing a flash of white teeth, Peter saw the way her hips swayed, the way her fingertips traced her collarbone, every gesture deliberate, designed to ensnare the desperate souls wandering by. She was in her element, a siren reveling in her power, yet with every laugh, Peter felt his heart constrict tighter in his chest. It was then that he saw him, a man emerging from the shadows, his aura exuding confidence and danger. He wore an expensive suit, his hands glinting with rings that caught the light, but it was the possessive way he approached Nina that sent chills down Peter's spine. The man leaned in, whispering something in her ear that made her laugh harder, a sound that now felt like a dagger to Peter's heart. As the man's hands found Nina's waist, pulling her closer, Peter felt his world shatter around him. The moment was raw and brutal, every movement charged with a violent energy that left Peter paralyzed. He watched as Nina leaned into the man's touch, her body arching with a mixture of seduction and submission. The way she melted into him revealed a darker truth. This was a dance of survival, a performance crafted in a world where love was bartered for safety and warmth. The facade of joy she wore was slipping, revealing the sheer desperation that lay beneath. "Come on, baby, let's have some fun," the man purred, his hands roaming with a familiar possessiveness that made Peter's blood boil. Nina responded with a sultry smile, her fingers trailing down the man's chest, a visual mockery of everything Peter desired. "You know I've got what you need," she cooed, her voice dripping with seduction, and Peter could almost see the heartbreak lurking beneath her playful exterior. As the sleek black car pulled up, Peter felt the weight of despair pressing down on him like a heavy shroud. Nina slid into the passenger seat, her eyes flickering toward Peter for a brief moment, as if sensing his pain. But it was too late. The door slammed shut, and the engine roared to life, swallowing her in a cloud of exhaust and shadows. Peter stood frozen, the chaotic laughter and vulgarity of the street fading into a dull roar as he grappled with the destruction of his illusions. Days passed in a haze of bitterness and longing. Each night he returned to his balcony, haunted by the memory of that moment. The streets below felt like a haunting graveyard of lost dreams, where laughter echoed with a tinge of mockery. Unable to escape the prison of his emotions, Peter became a shadow of his former self, wandering the cobbled streets like a ghost among the living. Jealousy and desire battled within him, leaving him reeling in an internal storm that threatened to consume him whole. He spent sleepless nights replaying the scene, each replay more destructive than the last. The whispers of Nina's laughter mingled with the bitter taste of betrayal, turning every sound into a reminder of his own inadequacy. He loathed the world that claimed her, the twisted reality that forced Nina to dance along the precipice of danger just to survive. As he sat on the balcony, the moonlight casting a cold glow over his desolate thoughts, Peter felt the darkness creeping in. He was trapped in a cycle of obsession, torn between the longing to save her and the reality that she was already lost. Each passing moment felt like an eternity, suffocating him with the weight of unfulfilled desires and shattered dreams. It was then, in the depths of his despair, that Peter realized the true horror of his situation. He was not merely an observer of chaos, he was becoming part of it, losing himself in the shadows that lurked just beyond the light. The abyss called to him, and for the first time, he questioned if he had the strength to resist its seductive pull. A knock at the door. Days turned into agonizing weeks without a glimpse of Nina, and Peter found himself ensnared in a web of longing and despair. Each night, he sat on his balcony, staring into the dark abyss of the street below, haunted by the absence of her laughter and warmth. The memories of their fleeting encounters twisted in his mind like a double-edged sword, drawing blood with every recollection. He dreamt of her, the visions vivid and intoxicating. In his dreams, they would embrace, their bodies entwined in a passionate dance of love and desire. He would inhale her intoxicating scent, a heady mix of jasmine and danger, grounding him in a reality that felt forever out of reach. Yet, just as quickly, the dreams morphed into nightmares, with Nina slipping away into the arms of others, her laughter fading into the distance as he reached out for her, only to grasp at air. The chaos of his feelings mirrored the tumult of his dreams, leaving him restless and tormented. It was on a particularly restless night, when the air was thick with the scent of rain and desperation, that everything changed. The sound of a sharp knock shattered the stillness of his apartment, reverberating through his chest like a drumbeat of fate. Peter's heart raced as he stood frozen, a mixture of anticipation and dread coursing through his veins. When he opened the door, time seemed to stand still. There she was, Nina, standing before him like a tempest unleashed. Her hair cascaded in wild waves, framing her face and accentuating the sharp angles of her cheekbones. She wore a black leather jacket that hugged her curves and a fitted dress that fell just above her knees, revealing long, bare legs that seemed to carry the weight of the world. A hint of smoky eye makeup accentuated her striking green eyes, drawing Peter into their depths like a moth to a flame. She was intoxicating, a potent blend of rebellion and allure, and he felt his breath catch in his throat. "You've been watching me," she said, her voice laced with challenge, sharp and cutting like a blade. Her presence filled the doorway, and Peter felt a wave of heat rush through him, igniting the desperate longing that had festered in his heart. "Why?" she continued, raising an eyebrow, her lips curling into a sly smile that sent shivers down his spine. Peter stumbled over his words, desperation flooding his heart. "I fought. I wanted to help you," he replied, his voice trembling under the weight of his emotions. Her laugh was sharp, like broken glass. "Help? You don't even know me," she retorted, the words slicing through the air, filled with both derision and a strange, intoxicating allure. In that moment, everything changed. The fantasy he had woven around her shattered like fragile glass. Nina was not the victim he envisioned. She was a force of nature, fiercely independent and unwilling to be saved. She stood there, defiant and wild, challenging the very foundations of his longing. The depth of her gaze held a world of secrets, and he felt as if he were peering into the abyss itself. "Then tell me," he urged, his voice barely above a whisper, "tell me who you are." "Who I am." She stepped closer, her breath warm against his skin. "I'm the girl who laughs at danger and dances with chaos. I'm the girl who craves freedom and lives for the night." Her words dripped with a mixture of bravado and vulnerability, igniting a firestorm within him. Peter felt a rush of desire mixed with despair. "But don't you want more? Don't you want?" "Want?" she interrupted, her voice rising. "I want what I can take. I want to live in the moment, not get caught up in some fantasy of saving me." Her eyes flashed with a wild intensity, revealing the turmoil beneath her fierce exterior. The chaotic dance of desire and despair swirled around them, igniting a tension that crackled in the air. Peter reached out, his fingers brushing against her arm, and felt the warmth of her skin beneath his touch. "I can be there for you," he whispered, his heart pounding in his chest. "I want to understand you, to be a part of your life." Nina's expression softened for a fleeting moment, but then her guard returned, the challenge back in her gaze. "You think you can handle it? You think you can be part of this world?" she scoffed, gesturing to the chaos outside, the laughter, the shouts, the intoxicating sounds of life continuing unabated. "This isn't a fairy tale, Peter. It's messy and it's dark." "Then let me in," he pleaded, desperation spilling over as he grasped her shoulders. "Show me the darkness, and maybe we can find the light together." She stepped back, breaking the connection between them, her expression hardening. "You don't understand," she said, her voice steady but laced with an edge of vulnerability. "You think love is some grand adventure? It's not. It's a trap, a burden. And I'm not looking to be saved, not by you or anyone else." The finality of her words hit Peter like a cold slap, the truth sinking in like a stone in his gut. He was not the hero in her story, he was merely an observer, an outsider grasping at the remnants of a dream that was slipping through his fingers. Nina turned to leave, but not before casting one last lingering glance over her shoulder. "You want to know me? You'll have to step into my world," she said, her tone both challenging and inviting. "But be warned, Peter, it's not for the faint of heart." As she walked away, her silhouette fading into the darkness, Peter felt a mix of dread and exhilaration. The air was thick with unspoken words, and the ache in his chest deepened. He realized that the chaos he craved had come knocking at his door, and whether he had the courage to answer would determine the course of his life forever. In that moment, he understood that the abyss was no longer a distant fear, it was a seductive promise, waiting for him to embrace its darkness. Into the darkness. Nina's arrival each night was a tumultuous storm that swept through Peter's carefully constructed world. The moment she stepped into his apartment, the air crackled with tension, a mix of excitement and despair. He could see the remnants of her latest escapades etched in the lines of her face, the shadows in her eyes, and the scent of cologne that lingered on her skin, mingling with the sweetness of her perfume. Each time she returned, he felt a rush of emotions, jealousy, longing, and a flicker of hope that threatened to ignite into something dangerous. On one such evening, as the rain pounded against the window, Nina walked in, her hair damp and wild, clinging to her face like a dark halo. The leather jacket she wore was unzipped, revealing a snug, low-cut top that accentuated her curves. "Another night, another dance," she quipped, tossing her jacket onto the floor as she sauntered over to him. The nonchalance in her voice was a shield, hiding the chaos within. Peter, unable to mask his turmoil, snapped, "You can't keep doing this, Nina. You're losing yourself out there." The desperation in his voice hung heavy between them, his heart pounding as he struggled to maintain control over the whirlwind of emotions inside him. She laughed, a sound that was both alluring and taunting. "Losing myself? Or finding myself in the chaos?" She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "You think I'm weak, don't you? You think I'm just some girl looking for a way out?" "No," he shot back, his voice cracking. "I see how it affects you. You don't have to pretend with me." The vulnerability in his tone was palpable, and it infuriated him to feel so exposed in her presence. Nina's expression shifted, a fleeting glimpse of something raw and real. "You think you understand me, Peter?" she asked, her voice dropping to a near whisper, almost conspiratorial. "You don't know the half of it. Every night, I step into that world, and I become someone else, a performer, a fantasy. You see the girl on stage, but the reality is far darker." His heart raced as he watched her, feeling the weight of her words. "What is it like?" he dared to ask, the curiosity mingling with fear. "What do you have to do to survive?" She hesitated, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. "You really want to know?" The challenge in her voice made him feel alive and terrified all at once. "I kiss their lips, feel their hands on my body, and in those moments, I'm not Nina anymore. I'm whatever they want me to be, some fantasy they can't touch in their real lives. Doesn't that hurt?" Peter pressed, desperate to understand. "Don't you feel used?" Nina stepped back, a sardonic smile playing on her lips. "Used? It's a business, Peter. I make my choices. I have the power in those moments. You think they're in control because they pay? No. They're the ones who need me." She spoke with a bravado that made him both admire and fear her. "But it's not real," Peter exclaimed, frustration boiling over. "You're not just a fantasy, you're a person. You deserve more than this." A dark laugh escaped her lips. "And what do you think I deserve? A white picket fence and a family? This is my life, and it's not for you to judge. I know the risks, the darkness, and I embrace it." Her eyes bore into his, fierce and unyielding, and he felt the strength in her words wrap around him like chains. Each night, as she left to entertain strangers in the shadows, Peter wrestled with the suffocating weight of jealousy. He would stand by the window, watching her slip away into the night, his heart heavy with the thought of her in the arms of another man. The sound of her laughter echoing in the night haunted him, a reminder that she was desired and cherished in ways he felt he could never offer. But despite the chaos, Nina began to linger longer in his world. Their conversations turned into late-night confessions, her walls slowly crumbling as he revealed his vulnerabilities. She saw the man beneath the surface, fragile, yearning, and desperately trying to hold on to her. And in those moments, she would soften, sharing fragments of her life and the demons that clawed at her heels. One night, after returning from another rendezvous, she entered the apartment with a different air. The bravado was stripped away, replaced by exhaustion. "I hate this, Peter," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to go back, but I don't know how to escape." "Then don't," he urged, stepping closer, his heart aching for her. "Stay here. Let me help you." Nina looked at him, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "And what if I can't? What if I'm too far gone?" Peter reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "You're not gone. You're right here with me. We can fight this together." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and for a moment the facade crumbled. "You don't know what it's like to feel so lost, to have every choice stripped away until you're just surviving." Peter felt the walls closing in around them, the reality of their situation suffocating him. "But you have a choice now," he pleaded. "Choose me. Choose us." She drew back, the fire returning to her gaze. "You think love can save me? You think we can just walk away from all of this?" The challenge in her voice was electric, igniting the tension between them. "I believe it can," he replied fiercely, desperation seeping through his words. "But you have to meet me halfway. I can't carry this alone." Nina looked at him, torn between her desire for connection and the grip of her past. "What if I can't?" she whispered, a tremor of vulnerability threading through her bravado. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said softly, feeling the intensity of the moment wash over them. "But you have to want it." As the night deepened, the reality of their world loomed over them like a storm cloud. The duality of their existence, the harshness of her reality, and the fragility of his heart created an intricate dance of desire and despair. And though Peter was captivated by her strength, he knew the battle ahead would be fraught with challenges that would test the very foundations of their connection. With each passing night, the boundaries of their lives intertwined, pulling them deeper into a chaotic embrace. Peter remained a spectator on the sidelines, desperately trying to bridge the gap between love and the darkness that consumed Nina. And as she danced between the shadows and his light, he realized the fight for her heart was only beginning. Confronting the past. The night had fallen heavy, cloaked in a veil of uncertainty. Peter sat in his dimly lit apartment, the shadows dancing on the walls like phantoms of his despair. He thought of Nina, the way she laughed, the way her eyes sparkled with defiance. He longed for her presence, but as each hour dragged on, anxiety gnawed at him. There was something ominous in the air, an unshakable feeling that her past was creeping back to reclaim her. His thoughts were interrupted by a loud knock at the door, sharp and commanding. The sound echoed through the silence, sending a chill down Peter's spine. When he opened the door, he was met with the sight of a man dressed in a tailored suit, the fabric hugging his imposing frame. The man's presence exuded danger. His eyes were cold and calculating, reflecting a past Peter had only glimpsed in Nina's stories. Nina, the man sneered, pushing past Peter without invitation. Where is she? Who are you? Peter demanded, his voice shaking with anger and fear. Just a friend from the old days, the man said, his lips curling into a smirk. But I don't think she'd see it that way. He leaned against the wall, surveying the apartment as if it were his own. I'm here to collect what she owes me. The words hung heavy in the air, and Peter felt his heart sink. She doesn't owe you anything, he shouted, feeling a surge of protectiveness. She's trying to build a life away from. From what? The man interrupted, his tone laced with mockery. From reality? You think she can just run away from her debts? That she can play house with a boy like you? Just then, Nina entered the apartment, her laughter fading as she caught sight of the stranger. The color drained from her face, and Peter felt the world tilt on its axis. She moved instinctively toward Peter, seeking solace in his presence. Nina, there you are, the man said, his voice dripping with condescension. I've come to talk about your little debt. You've been avoiding me, but that ends tonight. And no, Nina stammered, her bravado fading. I don't have the money, Sam. Please, just give me some more time. Sam stepped closer, invading her space. You think I'm running a charity? You've had more than enough time. You can either pay me back or you can work it off. 1 full year at my brothel, no pay. Just a little arrangement. It's a simple choice. Peter felt rage boiling within him, but Nina's expression stopped him cold. Fear mixed with resignation painted her features, and he knew she was trapped in a web of choices that were never truly hers to make. You can't be serious, he said, trying to mask his anger with desperation. You can't do this to her. Nina turned to Peter, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Peter, please. I don't know what else to do. I can't go back to that life. Her voice cracked, revealing the raw emotion beneath her tough exterior. Sam chuckled, a sinister sound that filled the room. Oh, but you're already back in it, sweetheart. And you're going to make a choice tonight. Either pay up or fulfill your end of the bargain. I can make it easy for you, but you'll have to play by my rules. The air thickened with tension as Nina stood frozen, caught between her past and the future she dared to dream of. What if I refuse? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Then I'll make sure your little boyfriend here knows what it means to get involved in business he doesn't understand, Sam threatened, his eyes narrowing as he fixed his gaze on Peter. You're just a pawn in this game, kid. You don't have the guts to protect her. Peter felt a surge of determination rise within him. I won't let you take her, he declared, stepping forward, defiance coursing through his veins. Nina reached out, her hand trembling as she grabbed Peter's arm. Don't, she pleaded. This isn't your fight. You don't know what he's capable of. Maybe not, Peter said, glancing at Sam with a mix of fear and defiance. But I'm not going to let you control her life anymore. You'll have to go through me. Sam smirked, his eyes glinting with amusement. Brave words for a boy who has no idea what he's facing. You think you can protect her? You're just as much a part of this world as she is. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. As the tension escalated, Nina stepped between them, her voice shaking but resolute. Stop it. I'll go with you. Just leave Peter out of this. Tears streamed down her face as she faced Sam, her vulnerability cutting through the bravado she had carefully constructed. No, Peter interjected, his voice rising. You don't have to do this, Nina. You're stronger than him. Strength doesn't matter when you're drowning in debt, she snapped, her frustration boiling over. You don't understand what it's like to feel trapped, to be controlled by someone else's choices. The silence that followed was deafening. Peter watched Nina crumble, the weight of her past crashing down on her like a tidal wave. The fierce warrior he had admired was fading, replaced by a woman who felt powerless against the man who had once held her in a chokehold of fear. Sam stepped closer, relishing the emotional turmoil unfolding before him. So what's it going to be, Nina? 1 year of work in my brothel, or I take everything from you? Because make no mistake, I'll come for him if you refuse. Nina's breath hitched, her hands trembling as she looked between Sam and Peter. I can't, she sobbed, the pain in her voice shattering the last remnants of Peter's heart. The room was filled with a suffocating silence as Nina's decision loomed over them like a dark cloud. Peter felt the weight of despair settle on his shoulders, and in that moment, he understood the true depths of their struggle, a battle not just against the past, but against the very essence of survival in a world that sought to devour them both. Don't you see? Sam taunted, leaning back against the wall, arms crossed, a smug smile on his face. You can't escape your past, Nina. You'll always own me. You'll always be mine. With tears streaming down her face, Nina nodded, defeated. Fine, she whispered, her voice cracking. I'll do it. No! Peter shouted, reaching for her, but she stepped back, the distance between them growing insurmountable. You can't give in to him. But Nina looked at him, the despair in her eyes telling him everything he needed to know. It's the only way, Peter. I can't lose you, and I can't lose myself either. As she turned to leave with Sam, Peter felt a piece of himself shatter. He had tried to fight for her, but now it felt like he was losing her to the very darkness they had battled together. The door closed behind them with a finality that echoed in Peter's heart, leaving him standing alone in the silence of their shared pain. The night stretched on, heavy with sorrow and unfulfilled promises, as Peter sank to the floor, the weight of despair closing in around him. The world outside continued to turn, indifferent to the chaos that had just unfolded, two souls torn apart by the very choices that had brought them together. Silent tears, silent streets. The dim lights of the street outside flickered in the soft glow of dawn, but for Nina, the morning brought no reprieve. Each hour inside the brothel was a war fought in silence. The men came and went, their hands rough, their breaths stinking of lust and power. They were from every walk of life, from every generation, old men with shaking hands and young boys with eyes filled with a sick curiosity. Nina had learned to detach herself, to let her mind wander while her body became the plaything they craved. But deep inside, a piece of her shattered with each touch, a scream buried beneath the surface, a soul slowly dying. She would find solace in the few stolen moments she had to speak to Peter, though even those conversations were laced with sorrow. They would talk in the dark corners of the night, where her voice would tremble with unshed tears as she described her suffering, and he would sit, helpless, his heart breaking with every word. Peter was drowning in his own sorrow, unable to pull Nina out of her torment. The phone would crackle as her words came through, each sentence filled with the weight of her despair. "I hate them, Peter," she would whisper, her voice hoarse from holding back sobs. "I hate how they touch me, how they look at me like I'm not even human." And Peter, filled with guilt and rage, could only respond, "I'll find a way to help you. I swear I will. Just hold on, Nina." But she knew, deep down, that there was no escape. The brothel had become a prison, and Peter's words, though comforting, felt like echoes in a void too vast to cross. Peter's torment. As Nina endured, Peter spiraled into a pit of helplessness. The jealousy gnawed at him, a beast that tore at his soul every time he imagined another man's hands on her. He could see her face in his mind, her fake smiles, her forced laughter. The thought of her faking pleasure for those vile customers was unbearable, but the worst part was the fear. Fear of losing her completely, fear of the unknown that haunted their every conversation. He tried to think of ways to free her, 1,000 plans formulating in his head, but none seemed real. None would work. So he lived for those moments when he could hear her voice. When she called him late at night after the last customer had gone, when her voice was soft and fragile. He knew those were the only moments when she let herself cry. He'd sit in silence, listening to the pain she tried to conceal with shallow breaths. And then her words would come, sharp as knives. "They don't care, Peter. They play with me like I'm a toy, something they can discard when they're done." His eyes would sting with unshed tears, and his voice would crack as he said, "Nina, don't let them break you. You're stronger than this." But her reply was always the same, a bitter laugh, followed by silence. It tore at him, knowing that he couldn't be there for her, that no words could heal the wounds those men left behind. Moments of silence. Sometimes the phone calls would be wordless. Peter would just listen to the sound of Nina breathing, the quiet sobs she tried to hide, the exhaustion seeping through the line. And in those moments, the silence between them spoke more than any words ever could. He could feel her slipping away, each second spent in that place stealing a piece of her soul. He could hear it in the way she spoke less, in the way her laughter sounded more hollow, more forced. And then there were the dreams. The dreams that haunted him when he slept, where he saw her lying in a dark room, her body bruised and broken, her eyes empty. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, the fear gripping him so tightly he could barely breathe. Each morning, he would wake up more determined to find a way out, but as the day wore on, that determination would crumble under the weight of reality. The deepening abyss. One night, after a particularly difficult day, Peter couldn't take it anymore. The jealousy, the helplessness, the endless guilt, it was all too much. He called her, his voice shaking with emotion. "I hate this, Nina. I hate that I can't do anything. I can't stand knowing what they're doing to you. It's killing me." Nina was silent for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost resigned. "It's killing me too, Peter." Her words were like a dagger to his heart, and for the first time, he let the tears fall. He didn't try to hide them, didn't try to be strong. He cried for her, for the girl he loved who was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. "I'm sorry," he whispered through the tears. "I'm so sorry." But all Nina could do was whisper back, her voice breaking under the weight of her own pain. "I know." The line went silent after that, and Peter sat alone in the darkness, the sound of his own sobs echoing through the empty room. And as the night stretched on, he realized that this, too, was part of the abyss, a place where love couldn't save them, where hope was nothing more than a fleeting dream. The unseen war. Peter's battle wasn't just with the world outside, it was with himself. Every day, he fought the urge to give up, to let Nina go, knowing that he was powerless to save her. But every time he heard her voice, every time she cried to him, he knew he couldn't leave her. So he stayed, trapped in a cycle of despair, holding on to the fragile thread that connected them. And Nina, though her body was claimed by others, her spirit broken by the weight of their desires, held on to that same thread, praying it would be enough to pull her back from the edge. In the silence of their shared suffering, their love became the only thing keeping them both from falling into the void completely. But with each passing day, the question loomed larger in both their hearts: how long before even that thread snapped? Shadows from the past. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the streets felt like they were holding their breath, waiting for something to break the silence. Peter sat in his apartment, staring blankly at the ceiling, lost in thought. His mind was heavy with thoughts of Nina, her voice still ringing in his ears from their last call. He could feel her slipping away, each day harder than the last, and the helplessness gnawed at him. The knock on the door came abruptly, jolting Peter from his thoughts. He wasn't expecting anyone. With a sigh, he got up and opened the door, only to be met by a man, a stranger, well-dressed, but with an air of something unsettling. His sharp eyes flicked over Peter, as if assessing him. "Is Nina here?" the man asked, his voice dripping with casual confidence, but Peter sensed something darker beneath. He stood still for a moment, caught off guard by the stranger's directness. "Who's asking?" Peter replied, his tone tight. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "A friend. You could say I know her well." Peter felt his chest tighten, recognizing the implication. He fought to keep his face impassive. "She's not here." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Really?" "Because this is the address she gave me." Peter clenched his jaw, trying to remain calm. "I don't know where she is. Now, if you'll excuse me." Before Peter could finish, the man took a step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Tell her James was looking for her." Peter shut the door firmly, his heart pounding in his chest. He stood there for a moment, trying to shake off the unease that lingered after the encounter. He had met many of Nina's customers before, but something about this man felt different. Dangerous. And the fact that Nina had given him his address? That cut deeper than he wanted to admit. The next day, Peter couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The name James echoed in his mind. He had never heard Nina mention him before, and that made it worse. Was there a part of her life she hadn't shared with him? He felt a sinking feeling in his gut, as if he was standing on the edge of an abyss he couldn't see into. Later that afternoon, Peter decided to walk around the neighborhood to clear his head. He wandered aimlessly for hours, the chill of the evening settling in as dusk approached. As he turned a corner, he spotted a familiar face, the man from the night before. He was standing outside a bar, laughing with a couple of other men, clearly enjoying himself. Before Peter could think twice, his feet were already moving toward the bar. He needed answers. Peter stepped inside, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. The smell of stale beer and sweat hung in the air, but Peter barely noticed. He approached the group cautiously, trying to appear casual. James spotted him first, his grin widening in recognition. Well, if it isn't the boy from last night," James said, raising his glass in mock salute. "Come to change your mind?" Peter swallowed his nerves. "I need to talk to you. About Nina." The men around James exchanged amused glances, but James nodded, stepping away from the group. "Sure, kid. Let's talk." They moved to a quieter corner of the bar. James leaned against the wall, taking a slow sip from his drink, watching Peter carefully. "What do you want to know?" James asked, his voice smooth. Peter felt his throat tighten, but he pushed through. "Who are you? How do you know Nina?" James chuckled darkly. "Nina and I go way back. Longer than you've known her, that's for sure." Peter frowned, the unease in his chest growing. "What do you mean?" James glanced around the bar before leaning in slightly, his voice dropping. "You see, Nina didn't always work the streets. She's got a history. A real fucked up one, if you ask me." Peter's heart raced. "What are you talking about?" James looked at him with cold amusement, as if Peter were a naive child. "She was an orphan, you know. Grew up in a shelter. But that place wasn't what you'd think. The man who ran it, let's just say he didn't have the kids' best interests at heart." Peter felt his stomach drop. He had never known this about Nina. She had never mentioned her past in detail, and he had never pressed her, thinking it wasn't his place. But now, hearing this, he realized there were pieces of her story he hadn't even begun to understand. James continued, his voice low and sinister. "He used her. From a young age. Sick bastard. Eventually, they caught him, locked him up. But by then, the damage was done, wasn't it? She was 18 when she left that place, but the streets, well, they weren't much better." Peter stood frozen, the weight of James' words hitting him like a freight train. He had always known Nina had a difficult life, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. James watched Peter's reaction with a knowing smirk. "So, you see, kid, Nina's been in this game for a long time. You think you're going to save her? You think she's waiting for a knight in shining armor? She's been living in hell her whole life. And people like her, they don't get happy endings." Peter clenched his fists, his heart pounding with anger and sorrow. He wanted to hit James, to make him shut up, but deep down, he knew that what James said was true. Nina had been living in a nightmare for years, and no matter how much Peter wanted to save her, the truth was, he didn't know if he could. That night, Peter returned to his apartment, his mind swirling with the new information. He felt sick. The image of a young Nina, trapped in that shelter, being used and abused, haunted him. He wanted to confront her, to ask why she had never told him, but he knew that wasn't the answer. She had buried her past because it was too painful to face. As he sat in the darkness, the weight of it all crashed down on him. The complexity of Nina's world, the dangers she faced every day, the scars she carried, he wasn't sure if he was strong enough to handle it. But one thing was clear, his love for her had only deepened. And now, more than ever, he was determined to help her, no matter how dangerous or impossible it seemed. Yet, the question lingered in his mind, could he really pull her out of this abyss? Or was he too late? The price of love. The decision weighed on Peter like a leaden cloak, pressing down on his chest as he stood in the middle of his apartment. The walls around him, once comforting with the echoes of his childhood, now felt like silent witnesses to the unraveling of his life. He ran a hand through his hair, staring at the faded wallpaper, remembering how his father had painted it years ago. This was more than just a house, it was a piece of him, a relic of his past. Every corner held memories, from the sound of his mother's laughter to the smell of his father's tobacco. But now, all of that seemed insignificant compared to what he was about to do. Nina needed him, and he would do anything for her, even if it meant letting go of the only home he had ever known. The idea had come to him in the dead of night after another of their anguished phone calls. Nina's voice had been softer than usual, defeated, as if the weight of her world was crushing her spirit. And in that moment, Peter realized that words weren't enough. Promises weren't enough. If he wanted to save her, truly save her, he needed to act. He needed to free her from the chains of her past, and the only way to do that was with money he didn't have. But he had the house that had been passed down to him from his father, the house that was supposed to be his refuge. He had to sell it. The next morning, Peter found himself standing in front of a real estate office, his heart pounding in his chest. The glass door reflected his pale face, a mix of determination and fear. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The woman behind the desk looked up from her paperwork, offering a polite smile. "How can I help you?" Peter swallowed hard, his voice shaky. I want to sell my house." Her eyebrows raised slightly, but she nodded, gesturing for him to sit. "Of course. Let's start with some details." As he gave her the information, listing the address, the square footage, and the features, Peter felt a knot tightening in his stomach. This wasn't just a transaction. This was him giving away the last piece of his family, of his past. But what choice did he have? Nina needed out of that life, and this was the only way he knew how. The woman flipped through some forms, speaking in a calm, professional tone. "It's a good property in a desirable neighborhood. I'm sure we can find a buyer quickly." Peter forced a nod, though her words felt distant, hollow. The room felt too small, suffocating. He needed air. "How long do you think it will take?" he asked, trying to hide the urgency in his voice. "Well, it depends on the market, of course, but if we price it right, maybe a few weeks." A few weeks. Peter didn't have a few weeks. Every night that Nina spent in that place was another night she lost a part of herself, another night she was at the mercy of men like James. His heart pounded in his chest. "I need it faster than that," he blurted, his voice trembling. "I'm willing to take a lower price if it means a quicker sale." The woman looked at him, her expression softening as if she sensed the desperation. "We can certainly expedite the process, but you'll lose a significant amount of money." Peter's jaw clenched, but he nodded. "It doesn't matter. Just sell it. I don't care about the price. I just need it sold." The next few days passed in a blur. Peter visited one real estate office after another, growing more anxious with each passing hour. He could feel the walls of his world closing in on him, the pressure of time weighing on his every step. Each agent told him the same thing: selling fast meant selling cheap, and even then, there were no guarantees. But Peter didn't care about guarantees anymore. He didn't care about the money. He only cared about getting Nina out of that hell, about giving her the chance to start over. As he walked through the neighborhood, Peter couldn't help but feel the sting of loss with every step he took. The memories flooded back, his father teaching him how to ride a bike on the street outside, his mother waving from the porch, the smell of fresh bread baking in the kitchen. Every memory was like a ghost, haunting him, reminding him of everything he was giving up. But then he thought of Nina, and the pain in his chest deepened. He had seen the look in her eyes, the desperation, the fear. He had heard the way her voice trembled when she spoke of the men who visited her, of the things they did to her. And it was in those moments that Peter knew he had to do this, no matter the cost. His childhood, his home, even his future, they were all secondary to her survival. He would sell the world, and if he could, he'd sell his soul to save her. The final real estate agent he met with was an older man, his face lined with age and experience. He listened carefully as Peter explained the situation, and for the first time, someone seemed to truly understand the urgency. "I'll see what I can do," the man said, his voice low. "But you have to understand, you'll be walking away with far less than what the house is worth." Peter stared at him, his heart heavy. "I don't care. Just sell it." The agent nodded, scribbling down some notes. "I'll put it on the market immediately. We'll list it at a competitive price. Hopefully, you'll have an offer within the week." Peter left the office feeling hollow. He had done it. The house was officially on the market, and soon it would be gone. The place that had been his home for his entire life, the place where his parents had raised him, where he had learned what love and safety felt like, it would no longer be his. And yet, the only thing that filled his mind was Nina. Her face, her voice, her pain. That night, Peter sat on the floor of his living room, staring at the walls that had witnessed so much of his life. The silence was deafening. He thought of his father, of how proud he had been of this house, how much he had sacrificed to provide Peter with a safe, stable life. And now, Peter was about to throw it all away. But as the tears filled his eyes, he knew he had no other choice. He whispered to the empty room, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. But I have to do this. For her." His heart ached with the weight of the sacrifice he was making, but he knew deep down that he would do it again in a heartbeat. For Nina, he would sell his past, his future, everything. Because in the end, she was all that mattered. And he would not lose her. Not to that life. Not to the darkness. The fall of a broken heart. The day had finally come. Peter stood in the dimly lit hallway of his childhood home, now stripped bare, the last of his belongings packed away. His heart felt heavy, yet there was a flicker of hope burning deep within him. He had done it. He had sold the house. The buyer, a middle-aged man with a cold, businesslike demeanor, had handed him the briefcase filled with cash just minutes ago. Peter had clutched it like a lifeline, his hands shaking with anticipation. This was it. The money that would free Nina, that would give them both a chance at a future together, far away from the darkness that had swallowed her life. As he walked out of the house for the last time, Peter didn't look back. His mind was already racing ahead, imagining the moment he would see Nina again. He could picture her smile, the relief in her eyes when he told her it was over, that she was finally free. His pace quickened, his heart pounding in his chest. Every second felt like an eternity, every step taking him closer to the woman he loved, the woman he had sacrificed everything for. At the same time, across town, Nina stood at the window of the brothel, her hands trembling as they rested on the sill. The room behind her smelled of smoke and sweat, the sound of drunken laughter and vulgar comments drifting up from below. She had long grown numb to the sounds of this place, to the men who pawed at her night after night. But now, as she stared down at the cold, unforgiving pavement below, a different kind of numbness settled over her, a numbness that came with the crushing realization that there was no escape. Not for her. Not anymore. The weight of her past, of the years of abuse and degradation, pressed down on her like a suffocating blanket. She had fought, struggled to hold on to some semblance of hope, but now that hope had faded. The world outside the window looked just as empty as the one inside. No amount of money could erase what had been done to her. No dream of a better life could make her whole again. Her breath hitched in her throat as tears blurred her vision. She whispered to herself, her voice barely audible, "I'm sorry, Peter. I can't do this anymore." Peter rushed down the street, the briefcase of cash clutched tightly in his hand. His mind was buzzing with excitement, his steps hurried as he neared the brothel. He had called Nina earlier, told her to wait for him, that he was coming to take her away. But as he rounded the corner, his heart leaped into his throat. A crowd had gathered in front of the brothel, their voices raised in panic, murmurs of horror filling the air. Something was wrong. Peter pushed through the crowd, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. His eyes darted from face to face, trying to understand what was happening. Then he saw them, two women standing in the doorway of the brothel, their faces pale with shock. One of them was crying, her hands covering her mouth, while the other simply stared, her eyes wide and filled with sorrow. And then Peter heard it. The sound that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A low, anguished wail, followed by a sharp cry. She jumped. Oh God, she jumped. His heart stopped. A cold dread settled over him as he pushed further into the crowd, desperate to see what they were talking about. His hands were shaking now, his mind racing. And then, through the wall of bodies, he saw her. Nina. Her body lay crumpled on the pavement, her dark hair spread out around her like a halo. Her once vibrant eyes were closed, her face pale, lifeless. Blood pooled beneath her head, staining the concrete in a grotesque reminder of the life that had just ended. Peter's legs gave out beneath him. The briefcase fell from his hands, the money spilling out onto the street, unnoticed by everyone around him. He crawled toward her, his breath coming in ragged sobs, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch her face. Nina, no, 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 his voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. He gathered her broken body into his arms, cradling her against his chest, rocking her as if she were a fragile doll. His tears fell like rain, splashing onto her cold skin. Why did you do this? I was coming for you. I had everything. I was going to save you, Nina. I was going to take you away from all of this. His voice broke into a sob, his body shaking with the force of his grief. I gave up everything for you. I was going to save you. He pressed his forehead against hers, his tears mingling with her blood. Why didn't you wait for me? Why didn't you let me save you? But Nina was silent. The world around him was silent, save for the faint murmurs of the crowd and the distant wail of sirens. The life he had dreamed of, the future he had fought for, it was all slipping away, disappearing into the darkness that had consumed her. Peter's sobs grew louder, more desperate. You were my everything, he whispered, his voice hoarse. I would have given you the world, Nina. I would have given you my soul if it meant you could be free. But you left me. You left me alone. He rocked her back and forth, his mind unraveling as he spoke to her, his words tumbling out in a stream of grief and despair. I was too late. I'm so sorry. I should have been faster. I should have been there. Please come back, please. But there was no coming back. Nina was gone. The police arrived, pushing through the crowd, but Peter didn't notice. He was lost in his grief, holding the broken body of the woman he loved, whispering to her as if his words could somehow bring her back. Days passed, but for Peter, time had lost all meaning. The world had become a blur of grief and madness. He wandered the streets, calling out her name, searching for her face in every shadow, in every reflection. People whispered about him, about the man who had lost his mind, the man who had lost everything. He would sit outside the brothel at night, staring up at the window from which she had fallen, as if expecting her to appear there, to wave to him, to smile. But she never did. In the end, they found Sam. The police arrested him, charging him with human trafficking, with exploiting women like Nina. But it didn't matter to Peter. Nothing mattered anymore. Nina was gone. The world felt empty, cold, and he was lost in it, a man without hope, without reason. And as the days turned into nights, and the nights stretched into eternity, Peter remained in that place, forever searching for the woman he had loved, the woman he had lost, his heart forever shattered.